Right, we're going to make a start. So thank you everyone for coming to our NHS Waste How to Build a Circular Economy webinar. Like I said, we do have a really good panel today, and we also have an extra special guest that's just been added to the roster. We're going to start off with her, so really excited about that. Just to give a little bit of context, we know that there is a huge amount of waste within the NHS, and we've done a lot of webinars, a lot of studies and research into things like single-use plastics and things like that. But we found actually that the whole issue is a lot more nuanced than just trying to tackle one element of the waste that's being produced. And we talk a little bit more around how we can create a circular economy as opposed to just getting rid of certain products. So we're going to start today with a little bit of some scene setting with Janet Smith, who is our star panellist, who's come in to give us some perspective from the NHS point of view. So she's head of sustainability at Royal Wolverhampton Hospitals Trust. So we really appreciate her coming in today. We're then going to hear from Guy. He's from Sharp Smart. We've got Claire, she's the Director of Research and Development at New Green, and then we're going to be hearing from Connor, who is at Envitech Sustainable Technologies. So if everyone can again, just use that chat function just to say hello, whoever you are. Please leave contact details, whatever comments you would like. If you have a specific question, we will be doing a Q&A session after all of the presentations. Please put your specific questions into the Q&A function as opposed to the webinar chat, because they might get lost in there, because there tends to be a lot of conversations happen there. So if you've got a specific question, please say who it's for and add that to the actual Q&A function, and I'll pose that to our panelists at the end. So Clive's already said that he loves your background, Janet, so we're all sort of wishing for sunnier shores. So Janet, I'm going to pass it over to you. Please give us a little bit of a background of what's happening at the Trust, what your issues are around circular economy, and just give us a bit of an understanding of what your role entails.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Georgia had said, I'm Janet Smith. I work as Head of Sustainability for Royal Wolverhampton NHS Trust and also Healthcare NHS Trust. As we know, I think everyone who's in the NHS here, or even those who are not in the NHS, one of the things that's actually, when I speak to people within our trust, the first thing when I actually ask them, we need to reduce our carbon footprints, our carbon emissions. The first thing always that they raise is that, we actually need to tackle our waste. We need to actually look at recycling. Recycling is always a really good starting point when it comes to actually conversation. When I start conversation on carbon reduction, waste is always one of the first thing that's mentioned. So it is a really good start. So with the trust, we have done our carbon footprinting. Waste is one of the focus areas, of course, of our green plan. And although it isn't the biggest contributor to our carbon footprint, it is significant, given that all departments in the trust actually generate waste, whether it's clinical waste, whether it's domestic waste, whether it's metal, and everything. It adds up. The one thing as well that the trusts have, which might be unique by this time, because I think there's only 5 left in the country when it comes to incinerator. So we actually have an incinerator on site, which plays quite a big part in both our waste strategy and at the same time our energy strategy. So that's one thing. We generate a lot of clinical waste, of course. We generate a lot of domestic waste. We generate a lot of furniture and other waste. We generate even rubble waste, and also oil waste. So when you actually think about waste, every single thing that you could think of, we have waste, even like radioactive waste. So so there are like what you said, there are more, the waste in an NHS trust is more nuanced than just the things you see in the bins. So the trust has been working on that, and what I could say is that we actually, one of the biggest challenge that we had previously and also up to this time is actually getting the mixed recycling implemented. And I'm proud to say that the trust actually has managed to achieve now zero landfill on our domestic waste. And also we have achieved 51% recycling all across our sites. So we have implemented working aids recycling scheme. We have a recycling scheme for our cardboard, for our hard plastic, for batteries, for rubble, for used oil, for every single thing that you could think of that can be recycled. We are recycling them. The other thing is, of course, with regards to our clinical waste, we do put them in the incinerator, and also our offensive waste is put through the incinerator. So those are the two types of waste that we put in, and they are actually used as well. The energy coming out of it, which is 2 megawatts of energy, is used to actually heat the trust. So our New Cross site, which is the biggest site that we have over 100 buildings in it, it heats that. Provides as well for specific department like our sterilization, the sterile department, decontamination. It also provides power for cooling our cooling systems. So that's how we use that energy coming from our incinerator. The other thing is we also, of course, implement the recycling of furniture. So reuse, not recycling, reuse of furniture. So it's one of those things. So what we have in place is that we reuse what we can reuse. We also actually rework those that we can rework. So even for bins like sack holders, we bring in broken ones and made up a new one out of the broken parts. So that's how we're handling them. And also we are, of course, implementing all sorts of reuse and safe disposal. Like we just recently launched our inhaler safe disposal and recycling scheme. So which allows then the trust to reduce its carbon footprint when it comes to inhalers. So that's just I could actually talk for the whole day regarding, but it's just setting the scene that the trust is not unique from the other NHS trust. But what's actually unique for the trust is that we have an on-site incinerator, which makes it then some other technologies that's available in the market. The technology wouldn't actually wouldn't be, how I could say, would not work, or it will work in our trust, but it's not something that we would prefer, because we have an incinerator and we do gain some savings as well, and also energy out of it.
Well, thanks so much for all of those examples of the amazing stuff that you're doing. 51% recycling sounds pretty unique as well. I know that everyone across all of the trusts are working really, really hard to get to that net zero target. So really appreciate you setting the scene then, all the great stuff that you're doing at Wolverhampton. I'm going to jump straight into your presentation, Guy. If you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, tell us a little bit about Sharp Smart and what you're going to go through today. If there's anything that you can say, that is relevant to what Janet has been coming up against as well, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Thanks, Georgia, and thanks, Janet, as well for setting the scene. I think it's great to show that working in the NHS, you have the responsibility for clearing a lot of what we describe as waste, and sharing the insight of having the incinerator, I think is really valuable. So just share my screen now. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation I've prepared.
Fine, Guy, I can see it.
Okay. Just wait for that thing.
Did you want to go into presentation mode?
Yeah, I can't.
You go down, you see right down at the bottom on the right, and there's a
Oh,
little.
there we go.
That's the one.
Sorry, I couldn't access it because of the Zoom thing. Okay.
I see.
So yeah, I'm gonna flip the idea of this whole topic on its head a little bit, and I'm gonna say, Georgia, I think you've given this topic the wrong title, because I think if we want to talk about how to build a circular economy, we don't talk about waste, but we talk about materials. And I think that changing the way that people talk about waste will drive circular behavior, and we will understand that the reason that waste is got rid of, or something that is disposed, is because we don't appreciate the material qualities of the items that we've got. So obviously across the healthcare sector, the NHS spend 72% of their carbon footprint on the supply chain. So that's purchasing items, and about 2.5% to 3% is on the disposal related to it. So I would say that don't just focus on that 2.5% carbon footprint of the waste disposal, but the 72% of the materials that are being purchased by the NHS. Once we start to think like that, we can truly get towards circularity. So I'm going to try and not use the word waste so much on this presentation. Feel free to pick me up on it when I have a slip of the tongue. I really hope that after today, everyone that's listening to this webinar knows how to talk about circularity within the context of the NHS, and also that everyone feels really empowered to make a change within their hospital, no matter whether you're a supplier to the NHS or work for the NHS in clinical or non-clinical settings. So I do feel the need to answer this question as why circular? We're in 2023. We've had this crazy summer of forest fires and flooding across southern Europe. So there's no doubt about it. There's a climate emergency. I'm going to take a minute to go through the waste hierarchy, starting from the bottom up, because I think it's very important that everybody is aware of this, and I'll frame everything within a healthcare setting. So we start with high temperature incineration, disposal, or landfill. Landfill is being phased out. And obviously this is, on the private market, is the most expensive outlet, and also has the highest carbon footprint. It's worth being aware of that within a healthcare setting, a missegregated item will be disposed of via high temperature incineration. So even an item that would be 100% recyclable or reusable, if it's put into a incinerator, it's going in right at the bottom of the waste hierarchy. Now we'll talk about recovery. Energy recovery has become a very popular theme recently, with the UK's infrastructure growing a lot recently. But it's worth mentioning, if we're having a conversation about circularity, energy recovery is absolutely a barrier to the circularity of materials. I'll come on to that a little bit later. Recycling. Now, I think that recycling has a lot of potential for growth within the NHS, and recycling is one of the most common ways of achieving material circularity within the healthcare. As I've said on this slide, it's currently done in very limited use cases, and one of the reasons for that is because hospitals produce waste with lots of EWC codes. The EWC codes starting with 18 or 18 are related to healthcare and can prohibit recycling. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Here we go. Here's just a snippet of what healthcare waste types look like within the NHS. And as you can see, it looks quite complicated. You'll also note that it's only this one subcategory of recyclable waste with various EWC codes that is deemed sort of ready for recycling. So we'll talk about all this a lot later. Reuse is has an even lower carbon footprint than recycling. And what I would recommend is that anybody purchasing or looking to implement a reuse system in the UK, I'd have a look at the carbon life cycle analysis, and there is a fantastic free resource which, if you type into Google healthcare LCA database, you'll find this absolutely fantastic free resource where you can see comparisons of single-use and reuse products, so that you can make your own decision what is the best. In the case of Sharps containers, SharpSmart just work in a very small category. Peer-reviewed academic studies have found that there's an 84% reduction in carbon emissions for going for reuse as opposed to single use. And minimisation's best. Let's give a shout out to the Royal College of Nursing, who are doing a fantastic job with the Gloves Off campaign to minimise the use of single-use gloves. And also let's remember that public health services, the aim is to make people healthier so they don't have to go to hospitals and produce a service with a high carbon footprint. So minimization is always the goal. So anyone that doesn't know about SharpSmart, we provide reusable Sharps containers that are, first of all, safer for the end users, and they happen to be reusable, so they're a lot more sustainable. And over the course of our journey of 20 years of working with the NHS, we now work with over 40% of acute NHS hospitals, which is fantastic. On a typical 500-bed hospital, we would remove about 20 tons of single-use plastic from being manufactured and being incinerated each year. But it hasn't been easy. And I want to share some tips to anybody looking to work on a reuse program within the NHS as to what some of the challenges and barriers that we've got to overcome. There's going to be a theme here. It's to do with people. So one of the first considerations is procurement. Traditionally, reusable Sharps containers were on a waste category, which meant that the clinical end users didn't always have a say in using a more sustainable container. This changed with the help of lots of organisations, lots of people that worked really hard, but in particular the NHS supply chain set about in 2021 creating a reusable container framework, which allows standardization of pricing and the service level provided. Second consideration is infection prevention. implementing a reuse scheme is always going to have to be signed off by infection prevention leaders. And one of the key bits of work to achieve that was the formulation of a ISO standard, ISO 23907 Part 2, which is the first ever standard related specifically to reusable sharps containers. So it's not without all of this work in the background from academics, infection prevention leaders, clinical staff, that the change that the NHS needs to make can be made. And finally, in terms of the distribution and logistics, within just a single hospital, it's a real team effort to make any switch. So I know Janet talked about the inhaler take back schemes, or the crutches and walking aids. These are they absolutely require a team effort. So the theme here is people. We need to work together, cross-departmental, cross specialities to implement these schemes. Okay, so now I'm going to deep dive into some of the problems to do with to implement recycling within hospitals, and hopefully everyone has to be aware of these things when you're trying to introduce a recycling of materials scheme into a hospital. Education is always number one. Like I said earlier, you could have a 100% recyclable aluminium can that goes into a orange clinical waste bin. It's going to get treated by alternative treatment and then low temperature incineration from energy from waste. So you've got something that's potentially 100% recyclable. If it goes in the wrong bin, your carbon footprint is going to be much higher than it needs to be. Contamination. This is perhaps more complicated than this slide looks, but the thing that everyone needs to be aware of is, first of all, with any item, which area of the hospital is it generated in, and that will dictate, has the material been in contact with any known infections? If not, then it could potentially go into a non-infectious, non-hazardous offensive stream, which has potential for recycling. And then the other question to ask is, has it got any pharmaceutical or chemical contaminants on? These are both massive barriers to recycling the materials that have been generated. Next, another barrier is multiple polymer items. To give you an example, an enteral feed tube, which is used widely across the NHS, will have at least 3 polymers in. So that would be an HDPE body, a polypropylene driver, and probably a rubber connector. This is a real barrier to recycling, because unlike your PET bottles that you would get from home, there is no way that there is very little appetite from the recycling industry to collect these multiple polymer things. So anyone working with the supply chain can drive that question: is this item actually recyclable? And also, what is the polymer that it's made out of? Another barrier to entry, don't worry, I will come up with some solutions later, is that I believe the NHS England have vastly underestimated the carbon footprint associated with sending offensive waste to energy from waste. The reason being is that offensive waste contains lots of plastic material, which has a much higher carbon footprint than is on the calculator that is available. So these figures are from DEFRA. It's their carbon warm factors, and it shows that actually it's between 1.47 and 1.7 tons of carbon footprint for sending plastics to energy from waste, and that has factored in the energy generated from it. So again, this is why the circularity, recycling or reuse will far outweigh the benefits of energy recovery. So ways that you could achieve circularity within your hospital. A great example is what Sharp Smart have done with their single-use metals. You can see on the right-hand side of your page some fantastically segregated stainless steel, which will be going to closed-loop recycling, diverted from high-temperature incineration. To get a project like this through, you need to work with your clinical stakeholders. You need to find the areas in which these materials are generated. And another way that you can achieve circularity is by reducing the amount of clinical waste produced. So SharpSmart do provide consultancy and a range of behavioural change programmes to drive down the volume of clinical waste produced, which will again have a massive impact on reducing which materials are being sent to high temperature incineration or energy recovery and which can truly be recycled. So yeah, so if we ask what's the next challenge, it's quite clear that it is to recycle some of the materials that are purchased by the NHS, and SharpSmart are already at the forefront of this, but we want to look, after doing metals, we want to look at more plastic recycling. We already have pilot schemes up and running, and we're really excited to explore more materials and more materials from traditional waste streams, which can become circular. So I'll share all of the slides today with links to any sources that I've referenced. And of course, if anybody wants to connect with me on this QR code or ask any questions on the Q&A, I look forward to that later.
Thanks so much, Guy. And yes, I will be changing the rhetoric from waste to materials. I think that's a really good point, and it's something that we could all do with, I think just adding to that behaviour change piece that we talk so much about, that actually words really do matter in how you describe things. Just can change a mindset slightly towards a better future. So thanks so much, Guy, for and so, I have been asked if we're going to be sharing. As always, we do an event write-up on the Sustainability Partnerships website, which will feature this entire recording and all of the slides there for download as well. So I'm going to move on to you, please, Claire. So Claire is joining us from New Green, and we're excited to see what she has to share with us today. If you're able to share your screen.
Yeah. Is that working okay?
That's perfect.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Claire. I'm from New Green. I'm actually the founder of New Green and also the director of research and development. And essentially, we created healthcare at New Green to help healthcare with practical strategies to drive sustainability. So our vision is to create really strong long-term local networks. And our key goals are two real key ones: diverting waste from incineration through our research programs, and supporting healthcare sustainability through decarbonisation of the supply chain, and helping, a bit like what Guy was talking about, value resources from cradle to grave, so looking at things a little bit differently. So the bit I'm going to talk to you today about is the New Green approach, which is our audit approach. So we believe really strongly that no two sites are ever the same. That data should be the direction that you use to drive your sustainable strategies, and that you ultimately can't manage what you don't measure. So the principles of everything that we do are as follows. In order to be a sustainable business model, we need to reduce costs, we need to reduce emissions, and we need to increase the amount of recycled material. So we do that through our audit, which needs to obviously align to each site's individual missions, visions and values. We believe in generating and analysing the data to paint a picture of site sustainability overall. The data that we generate creates kind of a baseline for you to start working on specific areas within the site. So you can highlight areas of best practice and work out why they are as good as they are, but also highlight areas of concern and find touch points for change. And then we set targets, help to design and run change campaigns, and then re-audit and analyse the data to make sure that you've actually generated the change, made reductions, that everything is still cost efficient, and made interventions where needed. So it's a 4-stage approach where we collect, analyse, implement, and then future-proof the whole process. So the first stage is a really detailed waste audit. So we'll physically go in and we'll collect from each department the general waste, the offensive waste, and the infectious waste, and we'll go through every single item in every single bin. We then, whilst we're kind of going around the site, or sometimes we'll do it via email, depending on how it works, we'll take interviews with staff and stakeholders just to get a real understanding of how well people do understand sustainability, if there is, or how broad the understanding of the net zero campaign is, and how engaged the staff are. So yeah, we'll count, this is Josh, counting everything that's in, it looks like an offensive stream there. And they'll count literally everything, commenting on what we find, whether it's in the right bin, the wrong bin, how much it weighed, whether it was used or unused. So an example of a recent audit we carried out, we counted 69,845 individual items, and 41,627 of those were incorrect. So what it does is essentially we'll put all the data that we collect into a dashboard that looks like this. And it allows you to physically go into a specific department or a ward or a category and work out what the data is. So you can see counts, correct versus incorrect segregation, which waste category, so offensive, infectious, general waste, etc. We can create like a leaderboard. We can hone in on certain items that potentially are being overused or underused. And then we'll write a report and give you detailed kind of findings and recommendations for next steps. The kind of information you could get out of that dashboard is as follows, and we can get, again, we can give you whatever kind of parameters you want, as long as we know what we need to record for you, and we track it from the beginning. We can give you kind of various interpretations of the data. But this particular hospital, which we'll name Hospital A, if they had segregated infectious and offensive waste correctly, they could have saved 65.2 tonnes of CO2 every year. And that's the equivalent of 36 flights from London to Sydney. And then in terms of segregating by infectious and offensive waste, and then aligning to the new 2020-60 HTM goal, you could save £174,000 every year. And this isn't a huge hospital, so that's quite a low saving in comparison to some of the other sites' potentials. And that is the equivalent of 5 nurses' salaries. The next stage, the third stage, is the implementation. So this is where we look at the data, look at your objectives, and start to decide on what campaigns you want to deliver. So for example, the Gloves Off campaign, some sites obviously are already being successful, that others aren't. But you would basically start with, your most obvious incentive, and then you could, use the data to drive whatever your next campaign would be. So it'd be a continuous process. We create all the training and the visuals to help drive the change that you need. So obviously you need to ensure that the team understand what changes you're going to make through education, but you also need the right visuals to drive the messaging and give the right cues at the right time. So we know that, audits have been done before, visuals have been made, training's been given, and actually no change has been made. And often it's because they've not used the right data and they've used the wrong messaging. So we use a lot of behavioural science and then behavioural analysis of the data to interpret the behaviour. So this is quite a complex looking graph. It's a network graph analysis, but ultimately what it shows is how related items are in a bin. So this is medical packaging. The closer the little circles are together, the more interrelated the items are. So you can see the likelihood of somebody throwing something away if it's connected to something else. So ultimately, if you can get a tandem of the right behaviours, you can start to link those together and get better segregation. So the graph gives you information like items that are related, behaviours that are linked, and then trends in segregation. So it might be that you find clusters of information in a certain ward, which means you can go to that area and start to look at where the behaviours are good, and then ultimately where the behaviours are bad, and start to make changes in specific locations. And then the final stage is to check that you've actually done the right thing. So you need to re-audit. So you put all the data in, collect the sample exactly the same way that you did in stage 1, do the count in exactly the same way, and then compare the data from the baseline information from the beginning to this next stage. Analyze what worked, what hadn't, or what needs to be done next. And then write up a report on how successful the changes are. We can give you kind of cost savings that you would have made. We can tell you carbon savings that you could have made. And then the reason you would do it is obviously to align to supporting the net zero campaigns, and also a big section of scope 3 reporting, and then aligning to the HTM 0701 with regards to waste segregation. So a really accurate representation of how you align to that. You can understand the flow of materials. So although we're working with waste, we're actually looking at decarbonisation of that supply chain. So what materials are being purchased in the first place, and where are they ending up? Where are those materials being overused? Where are the areas that we could be looking at for swapping single use for reusable items? You can also look at it by department. So you can start to study behaviour by department. And leaderboards do seem to be quite successful. People quite like to be in competition as to who can save the most carbon and save the most cash per department. So that's been quite successful. You can realise the right interventions that you need to drive sustainability through that data, and then use the data to scope the introduction of kind of infrastructure and streamline processes and procedures. So that would be, you might need to scope the use of autoclaves, or a more efficient autoclave, so that you can have more reusable items on site. Or you may even look at tech like Envitech that's coming up shortly for kind of on-site treatment processes for waste management. So overall, our goal is to kind of work in long-term partnership to give practical approach to generating the right data to drive sustainability in the right way. And this is a quote from one of our team members, Josh, saying that sustainability is not a one-time action, it's a continued effort stretching generations. And that's everything from me.
Thanks, Claire. Really informative. I mean, the data and the dashboard and everything, it looks so intuitive and so easy for people to interpret. I think that one of the problems that we have when we talk about perceived med tech is the potential for it to be a little bit exclusive. People feel like they don't necessarily, I'm going to get all this data, but what will I learn from it? How will I be able to use it? I don't know how to use technology platforms, but yours is so simple, it's intuitive, and it's
I mean, the whole process began because I spent 2 years working, I spent 5 years working in medical devices before starting New Green, and then was like, oh, actually, before we buy a new product, let's try and work out how we can solve the problem of all the waste that we've generated by being a medical device distribution company.
Yeah.
And we basically found that we couldn't actually find the right waste. So we couldn't get hold of, the right procurement data, and we couldn't get hold of the carbon data. And then when we did the scientific research and found no one has the data. So it was like, okay, well, how do we practically solve this problem by coming up with a process that's affordable, but that also drives more than just waste management? And that's kind of that's how we started in waste ultimately. It's okay, well, if we work out what's in the bin and we work backwards, what does that say about the department, or what does that say about the supply chain? And of course, then you get the idea of, well, no two sites are the same. Some sites have an on-site incinerator. What impact does that have on the ability to segregate waste? Some sites are really, really remote, and it's really, really expensive to move things around. So how do we potentially compact that waste or manage that waste before it's moved? But also just put stuff in the right bin. Like, the cost and the carbon saving just from doing that is huge. And we've done a lot of research. We've found, we've seen that audits have been carried out before, and messages were given, but the messages aren't right, and no one's really studied, okay, well, how do people interact with that message? What impact does it have being in the NHS and that environment? You really have to understand the behaviour in order to get the right change. And then the kind of exciting bit for us, because we're all kind of data geeks, but getting the ability of somebody who studies behavior, who's never been on site, and just giving them waste data, and then being able to say, oh, actually, well, based on all this information, we can work out that the likelihood of someone putting medical packaging and gloves in the right bin is 60%. So what does that mean about the behavior at that point of disposal? So you can start to really, and obviously all these are small parts, but if you can kind of build those up over time, you start to get a real generation of change, and people start to think about things, like Guy was saying, it's not a waste, actually it's a resource. And at the point of, we buy something and we value it, and we're finished with it and we're getting rid of it, at that point we need to work out, okay, well, who is this now of value to? And we know that if we can get more into the offensive waste stream, we can then do something with it, and there is, you know, potential to turn that into a resource again and potentially put it back into healthcare, which is, you know, the golden ticket, you know.
Yeah, that's what the whole circular economy is about. Well,
And
you know,
we've got small ambitions, but you know, we'll get there.
Well, we always say we can't change what we can't measure, but we can't measure what we don't see. And I think that, you know, what you're able to show people is very stark. We'd all like to see, find out who Hospital A is, but we'll.
Oh, they're not that bad either.
Yeah. I'm going to have to jump straight over to you, Connor, because I feel like we are not going to have a lot of time for Q&A at the end. If anyone does have any burning questions specifically for any of our panelists, please pop them in that Q&A function. I'll pose that to panelists at the end. I'm going to jump straight to you in your presentation now, Connor, please.
Thanks, George. You might just let me know you can see my screen now. You should be seeing the
Yeah, we can. It's perfect. Yeah.
Excellent, perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Connor Connolly. I'm Vice President of Business Development for Vitec. We're an Irish company. We're focused on sustainability, and I think, you know, the structure of this conversation has been very interesting. I think we're all saying the same thing, which is good. You know, we're not contradicting each other, and I think you'll see a similar theme as we go through the slides. My intent today is to walk you through a little bit about our company, our technology, and then the context that we're here to talk about, the circular economy. So I think, you know, everybody at this point is aware of, you know, the issues of climate change and also the plan to reduce carbon footprints in the context of the NHS, you know, the impacts of the carbon footprint nationally on the UK, but also healthcare as a global impact. I think it was fantastic to hear Janet in the beginning with real life examples of how is a trust looking at this green plan from the NHS and implementing it. And in particular, you know, Janet, you mentioned about waste being a key pillar. So we do a lot of work globally, and we talk to different customers in different countries, and the same pillars keep coming up: energy, water, waste. It's similar kind of concept when they're trying to reduce the carbon footprint. I think the other thing I'll just mention, it was interesting, Guy, you mentioned, and Claire and Georgia have also referenced this, the piece about waste, and we've had a very, very similar conversation internally. At what point does waste become waste? I think the legal definition of when there's an intent to dispose of something, it is waste. So if you're not intending to dispose of it and you're trying to get extra value out of it, I think there's certainly a theme across everything that we've spoken about. The quotation that we have on the screen here is from Simon Corbin. So the NHS Estates team has published a recent clinical waste strategy in March that, if you haven't read it, I would advise taking a look at that. But you see that he references reducing waste and increasing opportunities to reuse, to remanufacture, to recycle. So I think we're all saying the same thing across the board. We're in Envitec, we're specifically focused on clinical waste. So very quick example, I think Jordan mentioned in the opening that it's a nuanced approach that we need here. It's not a blanket approach. There are different types of waste, different types of waste streams, different types of treatment technologies, and different ways of thinking about this. So if you specifically follow a blood tube or a Petri dish or, you know, a clinical waste material from a lab as an example, generally speaking, it goes into a segregated waste stream. Most people will be familiar with this. You know, we've spoken about today, offensive waste versus the orange bags, yellow bags, the color coding, and the same concept is applied globally, so not just in the UK. This is generally collected from the location generating that waste. And depending on where you are in the world, it's often brought and driven. So there's carbon associated with the transport of this waste. And then it's either going to an alternative treatment, you know, a high temperature steam sterilization. In some cases, it's driven directly to incineration. I think actually Janet mentioned, I think there's 5 sites you mentioned, Janet, with incineration plants on site. I was in one of the other sites 2 days ago in the UK. So very interesting to see that in action as well. So you're either going to alternative treatment, steam sterilization, in some cases directly to incineration, as Janet gave that example earlier. And historically, you know, we've moved away from landfill, but what was happening, and I think still happens in some parts of the world now, is it can be transported, sterilized, and then a lot of the material is buried, which is the worst case example. So again, the context of moving towards generations and the technology that we offer, if you specifically start to look at the climate carbon footprint reduction strategy that the NHS is implementing and the various scopes, so scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, I think one of the key points here, and we spoke about this, and you know, some of the panelists mentioned this earlier, waste falls into scope 3, and oftentimes scope 3 is the most difficult to approach because it's the piece of the puzzle that you're not managing directly necessarily. But ultimately, what can the NHS do? And if you look across the broad spectrum, they're looking at procurement strategies, they're looking at the suppliers being the waste management companies in this case, and what can they do to help healthcare actually reduce their carbon footprint. So the other piece of this is, holding the suppliers accountable, but also, focusing on the context of where this fits into the bigger picture. But if you look at some of the research, and I think my colleagues mentioned it earlier as well, it's not just about looking at what you have, but collaboration is essential. So we've been working with New Green, we're working with other companies in this space as well. And I think collaboration is key, and fair play to sustainability partnerships for setting these types of conversations up so that we can collaborate and have an open conversation, but also innovation. So it's not just doing things the way we've done it and not just thinking inside the box, but it's thinking about innovative solutions that can actually help to drive this change as well. So you'll recognize the upside down pyramid of doom or hope, no matter what way you look at it. And I think, again, Guy mentioned a lot of this earlier, so I won't repeat it, but we think along the exact same lines. So if you look at what's been happening over the last number of years, there's been an evolution of waste management processes, of waste treatment processes as well. Ultimately, the first step was get away from landfill, stop burying this material. Nobody wants to do that. So as you move up the chain, you're going towards disposal. And I know it was mentioned earlier, which we would agree with, that recovery activities, whilst they're better than burying, there is a carbon footprint associated with those. And in particular, if you're putting the wrong materials into those streams, that's not necessarily a good thing as well. I have been to locations in certain countries where it's set up to incinerate and capture the energy, but that function has actually been broken. So instead of capturing that energy, all that they're doing is incinerating. And the other piece of this is that when you incinerate, you also have ash, and oftentimes it's 20% of what you burn is left over. So what happens to that ash is also a question. So I think ultimately, we're saying the same thing that was mentioned earlier, that we want to move up this waste hierarchy and go back towards recycling. Obviously, people are focusing on the prevention, and I think Claire gave a good example of the segregation and doing that properly. So this is where the collaboration piece comes in. We need to understand what's happening. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to work together to drive towards that change. So introducing generations technology. We have looked at this space for about 10 years. I think I mentioned in the opening that I come from a lab background. So the founders of this company are lab people. They've lived in labs. They've spent their time working in labs, but equally then we've worked in manufacturing companies and medical device products. So we've been the ones handling the products, we've been then the ones manufacturing the products, and now we've pivoted to sustainability. So how do we treat the waste that's associated with this? Generations is a very simple concept. I'm going to show you a very quick video in a moment of exactly what we've developed. It's climate friendly, so it's non-thermal. It's not a steam sterilization. It doesn't heat to high temperatures. Because of that, it's low energy and it's low water. So if you compare our technology to the likes of an autoclave, autoclaves use an awful lot of steam and an awful lot of water. This is low energy and low water. It uses a biodegradable chemical, organic chemical that effectively breaks down to vinegar and water. So if you remember, Guy, you actually had this up on your slide as well about the 18 codes. So the first check is this infectious? So this is a sterilization technology. You're taking a healthcare waste, a clinical waste that's potentially infectious, and then you're treating it and sterilizing it. So you're rendering this material safe, which again opens up this concept, okay, now what can we do with the material now that it's not necessarily an infectious risk waste? The other piece I'll mention quickly, and then I'll just move on to the summary part, but the clinical waste strategy specifically calls out the consideration of on-site treatment of infectious waste. So that's a statement that's actually in that. Very simple concept, as I mentioned. You take your clinical waste, you bring it to the system, 3 buttons. So we've simplified the user experience of this system. You press the first button, the receiver turns towards the user. You press the second button, the system is controlled with health and safety in mind. It is a shredding system that uses the chemicals. You have to follow the specific procedures to use it. You put in your waste and you press the third button and the door closes. And over the course of 18 minutes, the system will pump in the chemical, dilute it with water, so it's sterilizing the materials immediately, and then it begins to slowly macerate. So it will open the bags, or it can work with rigid containers if they're plastic, and it will slowly begin to macerate and then build up momentum over time to shred that waste. And ultimately what you get at the end of this is a flake material. So the liquid that's in there is drained, and it's safe to go to drain because the chemical we use is biodegradable. And then the solid that's left is a mixture of the materials that have gone through the system. So I'm going to take a risk and show you.
Video is working, Connor, but no sound.
2 buttons. Simple to use. Waste goes in. Door is closed. You can see the sensors that are there for health and safety. Cycle commences, and then over the course of about 18 minutes, as I said, the system will shred it. And then the material is filtered, so the liquid is taken away, and then the flock is what remains.
I can't hear you just now, Connor. The other people can.
Did the video interrupt the flow?
No, no, it's fine. I can hear you now.
Oh,
So
good.
carry on.
So this is an independent study from a UK company called Carbon Action. And they looked at an example of a hospital laboratory. They did a waste audit and looked at the amount of waste produced. In this case, it was 100 tons per year. Channel A was the existing methodology for treatment. So driving the waste to a separate location, sterilization of that waste and alternative treatment. From there, it was actually driven to a cement manufacturer where they were incinerating it to power their cement kilns. And then ultimately the ash was going to ground. Channel B is the generations technology. So immediately you're removing transport from the road, but you're also, the major component here is the energy that's used for large scale treatment of this type of waste. So ultimately by switching to the likes of generations technology, 1, you're removing the risk of transporting this type of risk waste. 2, you're removing the transport. And then 3, you're actually removing the energy that's associated with those treatment technologies. And the final piece I'll mention, I know we're a little bit tight on time, is not only, are all those emissions reduced, but centrally, and back to the context of our discussion now, you're now opening up an opportunity of sterilizing of these materials and considering recycling opportunities. So if you think of a lab, most materials in a lab are single-use plastic. The same can be said across a lot of the healthcare trusts. But now you have a mixture of polymers, and we've been working with recycling companies and material recovery facilities, and they have the technology to separate metals, glasses, plastics, types of plastics, etc., and ultimately bring it back towards our intention here, which is a more circular environment. So, I think maybe just to summarize very briefly, across the speakers that we've had, we've spoken about, the waste hierarchy, the need to understand the waste streams, the segregation, but also moving away from what we're doing today, which is really, the incineration piece, the obstacles to the circular environment. I think collaboration is key, innovation is key. We all need to work together here to address this issue. And I think you can see from what Guy mentioned as well, the reusable containers is one part of it. Where we fit in is the actual waste stream and processing that waste stream. So you can see across the speakers today where hopefully we can all work together and try and address this.
Thanks, Connor. You actually already have a question here about working with New Green and outsourcing your audit. The question is around what does your audit include? Could you let us know a little bit about that?
What does our waste audit include?
It was an anonymous attendee, so I can't find out exactly who it was who asked, but you can see the question there. You should be able to see it. It just says, what does your audit include? Yeah,
so I can maybe answer this quickly. So yeah, we are collaborating with New Green. We're collaborating with many companies in this space. As I mentioned, I think we all recognize that we have to work together. Our audit includes looking at the waste streams, where's the waste coming from, putting it into the context of what should go into our technology and what should not go into our technology. So for example, we don't treat cytotoxic waste and anatomical waste. So it's crucially important that the waste streams for our technology are appropriate for the system. So hopefully that answers the question.
Anonymous attendee, hopefully that does answer your question. You can always get back in touch with Connor if needs be. If all of our panelists would like to add your contact details, please feel free to add them to the chat section. Guy, I know you just answered a question about the ambulance service, and there's also a question here about do you recycle/reuse all sizes of clinical waste containers?
Sure, great question, Gary. So really important to remember, we don't recycle our containers. They are reusable. They'll be reused 500 times. The containers range from a 14-litre container all the way up to a 64-litre container. So yeah, that's all sizes.
Hopefully that's that question answered for you, Gary. And one more for you, Connor, is around, is the infectious and offensive waste treated together?
So the technical answer to that is the system can work in different methods. So we have different solutions depending on the waste stream. So depending on what's going into the system, for example, we can collect the effluent, the liquid from the output of the material if there was anything that shouldn't go to drain. So there's various options, but I'd be happy to, I sent my contact details in there. I'd be happy to speak to Maria, I think it was.
And we are running out of time, but I wondered, since we have Janet on the call, if any of our panelists would like to quiz her with a question at all around what she's doing and the work that she's doing, anything that you would like to know from her, and just given this opportunity. Oh, guys, raised his hand very politely, used the raise hand function officially to ask. So go ahead, what's your question?
I thought I'd get in there first. I was going to ask, with the publication of the NHS England waste strategy in March, has the trust, at least at Royal Wolverhampton, come under any pressure to divert material from the on-site high temperature incinerator to perhaps facilities with a lower carbon footprint?
No. The short answer is no, but the long answer is it's really good to hear actually from the panel, because like what Connor said, it's very important that we all work together. The trust, actually, one of the key things that the trust does is we employ a professional waste manager. So that means he knows what waste is all about. That's very, very important. We also have a system actually of doing waste audit, when all our departments are subjected to annual waste audit with regular actually follow-up on where they are to go in terms of compliance. And also waste segregation is a must. You need to segregate, or else you won't be able to actually do something, because reduction of specific types of waste is important, so that you know then how you're going to deal with it and how you're going to dispose it, and the best option to dispose it as well. And that's one of the reasons why we actually achieved 51% recycling, and the fact that we also actually reuse and switching, we're actively switching products because we're reducing. One of the things is very, very important is actually to work with suppliers to reduce the source of the material that goes into the waste stream. So we're switching into products that has less packaging. We're switching to products that actually reusable, like theater cups, etc. So that's important. And for Claire has said about of course the waste audits and treating and things like that. One thing that we haven't actually really talked about, of course, the cytotoxic and anatomical waste still needs really those high incineration. So and given that during the pandemic, actually, when some of the waste company that used to incinerate clinical waste from trust in the NHS, some of them has gone bust. There was actually an issue with regards to resiliency, and that's where the trust also comes in. We could actually provide resiliency within the Black country when something like that happens. So what I'm trying to say is there are places for technology. There are places for technology in the whole stream. It's not about exclusion, but it's about looking at what's actually available and making the best use of it.
Thanks, Guy. You had a very short initial answer and then a very robust follow-up. So I really, really appreciate that. Connor or Claire, if you've got anything burning for Janet while you've got the opportunity.
I mean, just from my perspective, just based on kind of what you've just said there, there definitely is scope for all sorts of innovations in tech. It's just about using the data to start with. So you make sure you make the right investments. Because I think a lot of the problems come from bad messaging and not the right data, or trying to use data that exists to force it into a process that doesn't really work. So sometimes, I think having the right data and building it from the ground to make sure it scopes for what it is you're trying to deliver is really important. But I think having that incinerator, it can be seen as an advantage. It's just how much you put in there. We could probably move a bit in a different direction.
Like, very quickly, if there's a moment, George just asked Janet. Janet, you mentioned about the recycling. I think you have 51% across the board. Have you looked at the clinical waste stream? Have you gone as far as considering what you can do with your clinical waste in terms of recycling?
We have, and it is a work in progress at the moment, because I think the bottom line as well with all of it is that you deal with staff. And I think all of you has highlighted that there has to be a buy-in in the staff, and also there has to be a behavioral change, and the messaging actually needs to cut across. And we do use data. Data is a powerful thing that you could actually use to put across the messaging. Sometimes I know people don't like the term, but sometimes it's good to weaponize data to get that message across. And one of the things that the trust does very well is actually partnering with different providers. One of them that we've looked at actually recently is bins, clinical bins made out of from sawdust, which WoodSafe has actually demonstrated and actually worked with us. We're gonna trial it and we'll see what the result of it. So and also we're working with other companies actually to look at recovering the high quality plastic that is used in medical devices, to wrap medical devices and equipments, because that's a high quality one. Although there is a legal obstacle on that, but we're working with different companies and also with Nilipac on looking at how we can recover that, because that's something that actually still sterile when they're taken out. So there are a lot of things happening within the trust, and I think like what I said, the advantage is we actually have quite a well switch on waste and recycling team that works closely with every single department in the trust. That's also greening their services.
Well, we're losing delegates now because we are 7 minutes over and everyone's going away to get the lunch, I'm assuming. Thank you so much for everyone spending their time with us today for the last hour and a half and the extra 7 minutes as well. I've just posted a link here to everyone for our next event, which is live now, and that is all about, we have been talking about the Scope 3 piece, so that's all about the pushing the sustainable supply chains. So as I mentioned, everything is available or will be available on the Sustainability Partnerships website, and there will be a write-up. Thank you so much to everyone for joining in the audience today, and thank you so much for Janet, Guy, Connor and Claire. I just want to make sure, Guy, you have been given an email address in the Q&A. Did you pick that up before we leave, or do you need me to send you that?
It's okay, I've got it.
You got it. Great. Okay, cool. And
Thanks
thanks again for everyone for joining. And we'll see you again on the next panel.